the best players of all time, and Luis Scott-Vargas, who he didn't think he was going to make top 8. We didn't think he was going to make top 8. 14th place coming into the final round. He wins, and he's in.
Yeah, so this is our featured matchup here, and this will really show some of the strengths of Malirapod. Sometimes the flyer can be pretty difficult for the deck to deal with, but Malirapod is well equipped in this kind of matchup.
We've got a Darksteel Citadel, a Mox Opal, a Memnite, another Mox Opal, an Etched Champion. Well, Luis.
A metal-crafted Etched Champion on turn 1. This is one of the reasons that you want to play Affinities, because you get to do things like this to your opponent.
Luis with a very simple Temple Garden and hands folded. So, Sigrist, we'll see what he has to follow up with. It's a Thoughtcast, a pretty good follow-up. He's going to find 2 cards. One of them is a Mass Ethereum. The other one is a Blink Moth Nexus. So immediately he's going to put Luis underneath the gun. If you're Pod here, what do you got to do to get back in this?
I mean, you're playing, right now Michael's playing a one-sided game of Magic. Luis hasn't really done anything yet. You cross your fingers and hope that there's not like a cranial plating to go on this Etched Champion immediately. The one thing that Luis is going for it is that the Etched Champion is only dealing 2 right now. You actually could blow up some of maybe the Signal Pests, some pieces, take 2 every turn, and race this.
Scott-Vargas at 17. He's going to play a Forest for his turn. We'll see if he has some sort of Mana Accelerated, Wall of Roots, maybe a Kasali Pride Mage, who knows, but he needs something to get going. Here is Wall of Roots, the 05 here, and he's just going to pass the turn back. So Acceleration, you know, is a little bit delayed here as Sigrist will draw a card for his turn. Again, he does have a copy of Master of Ethereum in his hand. We'll see if he wants to go that route or maybe go to the skies with that Blink Moth Nexus.
Yeah, so Luis has ramp. What's going to be important for him to do is he can combo quickly. That is possible. Generally, in this matchup, he tries to value for a while. Luis has some cards in his main deck that can blow up key artifacts. He does have Kasali Pride Mage, for example, but he's under a lot of pressure.
You're going to see Massive Ethereum pre-combat, going to pump the entire team. Signal Pest will do the same, so a big attack here. Of course, Etched Champion will come across and get through. So Scott-Vargas is going to go down to 12. He'll take a draw. It's going to be a Verdant Catacombs. He's going to go down to 11, potentially 9 if he searches out a dual land, but it's just going to be a basic swamp. So let's see what the Hall of Famer can do on his 3rd turn.
Well, because of Master Ethereum and that Etched Champion, Luis is pretty much in chump block mode here on the Master of Ethereum. Granted, he has cards like Kitchen Finks that are really well suited to blocking there. So he does have a double chump blocker right now in Kitchen Finks.
And he also plays a Birds of Paradise off of the Wall of Roots. Now, don't forget, Wall of Roots now in 04 due to that -0/-1 counter as Scott-Vargas passes back to Sigrist. Now, he's got a very large Massive Ethereum here. It's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's currently a 6/6. Nexus could make it a 7/7, and that doesn't even account for the fact that Sigrist could play some artifacts pre-combat. So that thing is absolutely gigantic. It looks like he's going to go with a Springleaf Drum to make Master a little bit bigger. Let's see what the follow-up's going to be. Just fire up the Nexus. That'll also make Master a little bit bigger. And, of course, Nexus is a 2/2 itself, and now it's going to be a 3-power attacker. Yeah. Trigger the battle cry, and in we go again.
That last card there was Ornithopter too, and I really like this. Sigrist is taking to the skies very well, and that's a good spot to attack Malirapod. You see the only flyer he has out right now is Birds of Paradise, and the deck's pretty short on flyers in the first place. So what this will do is it'll put a lot of pressure on Luis to find the combo as fast as he can.
And as Luis is blocking here, we do want to let you guys know about other matches and what is occurring here. We talked about Josh McClain versus Oscar Jones. Oscar Jones, your 2-seed. He was on the play. He's up a game.
Now, when Josh played Ben Friedman earlier in this mirror match, game 1 took 43 minutes. This one noticeably shorter.
43 seconds, maybe. It did not take very long. You see Scott-Vargas figuring out the best ways to block here. You've got Wall of Roots in front of a Memnite. You've got a Birds of Paradise in front of a Master of Ethereum. He's trying to juggle his resources here, knowing that, again, he's going to be attacked for a bunch of damage the next turn and the turn after that. So he's got to balance his resources and still basically try to figure out how the best way he can probably gain infinite life and combo off.
Yeah, so he does get to keep a Kitchen Finks and a Wall of Roots. Remember, he needs to find a Malira and a Viscera Seer. But the other thing is that he's going to have to keep blocking every turn. Like the Master of Ethereum has to be blocked. And on top of that, Luis is still taking incidental damage from these flyers every turn. So even if he jumps the Master of Ethereum, he only has 1, maybe 2 more turns.
After the dust settles, Scott-Vargas goes down to 5. Sigrist loses nothing in that exchange. So let's see what Luis can do on this turn. He's got a Wall of Roots, he's got a Kitchen Finks, he's got some mana available. You see, he's looking at 5 cards in his hand, as we do have an update here that Brian Liu with Nyapod up a game over Ben Friedman playing Malyrapod. So the 6th seed does break serve. Scott-Vargas realizing there's nothing I can do to get back into this game. He's going to pick it up. So Michael Sigrist is going to win game number 1 over Luis Scott-Vargas. Affinity, your 1 seed, up a game over Malyrapod. Those players are going to take a look at sideboards. We'll do the same momentarily here, but we're going to bring it back to the booth because, Matthias, it is time to give away some Star City Games Premium, my friend.
All right.
Now, do you want to ask the question or should I ask the question? It's your call.
You know what? I can go with it for this one. Let's go ahead and do that. Yeah,
I'll do the rules.
Question. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So, for those of you guys who are new to the broadcast, because we're doing a Grand Prix instead of the Open Series, simple thing's going to happen here. Matthias is going to ask you a question, and you guys are going to tweet the answer with the hashtag of GPRichmond. Make sure you're following at SCG Live as well. And we'll draw one winner at the conclusion of this round. And it's going to be GPRichmond and hashtag SCG Premium. Thank you very much. But we're going to draw the winner at the conclusion of this round. You're going to ask a question, tweet with those hashtags, and Matthias, I'll let you fire away.
Right.
Don't make it too tough.
No, it's not going to be too much. So we made a big issue about Pod being pretty big in this top 8, and that's absolutely true. We've seen Luis Scott-Vargas is playing Malyrapod, Josh McLean's playing Malyrapod, Oscar Jones is playing Malyrapod. We mentioned that Brian Liu is playing a different style of pod, so we're looking for the name of a legendary 5-drop that sets Brian's pod deck apart from all the other ones.
And if you can name the legendary 5-drop that is in Nyapod, hashtag the answer GPRichmond as well as SCG Premium. Make sure you're following at SCG Live as well so we can get the winner, the 3 months of premium, over to you. And again, we'll announce the winner at the conclusion of our quarterfinal round. So it's about accuracy, not speed, as we're going to head back to the match and we're going to take a look at sideboards here. Scott-Vargas is going to be on the play. You have his deck list in front of you. The 15 cards, what can help him?
Well, one thing, and this is, people didn't know whether or not they included this in their sideboard, but it can change this matchup really fast, is the one of Kataki War's Wage. Not always played in Malyrapod, but Luis has decided to include it in his 75 this weekend. It will give him a lot of points in this matchup. Kataki, when potted for, can be devastating to Affinity, and it is there just for this matchup, and he'll bring it in. Other cards he can use, Harmonic Sliver blows up an artifact. It's a pretty good choice. And also, Orzhov Pontiff is very strong in this matchup because of its ability to get rid of O1s like Vault Scourge, like Signal Pest, like Memnite.
For the Patriots fan on our left, Michael, you see a sideboard on the screen, a Grafdigger's Cage, and that's Champion, 2 copies of Spellskite, a Blood Moon, 2 copies of Rule of Wall, 3 Ancient Grudge, a Dismember, a Spell Pierce, 2 copies of Thoughtseize, and a Whip Flare. It's got a lot of options at his disposal here. We saw exactly how good Etched Champion was in that first game. I expect him to probably bring in another one. You know, there are a lot of different ways you can go. You know, a lot of people ask about, you know, is Ancient Grudge good against Birthing Pod? Well, it's good against the card Birthing Pod itself, but it doesn't take care of anything else. And if the sideboard games go like the last one did, you know, Luis didn't actually even draw Birthing Pod, so you might not want that effect. I think one thing that's kind of universal here is how powerful Dismember can be to take care of Kataki, as you did mention, and some of the other creatures. Thoughtseize, maybe you want to discard spell, maybe you don't. And then Whip Flare is actually very powerful in this matchup, as it kills their stuff, but it doesn't kill yours.
Yeah, Whip Flare is pretty good. I mean, Pyroclasms have always been... Every deck is boarded that has Pyroclasm boards them in against Malyrapod. It's strong enough against pod decks that Affinity's playing a card like Whip Flare, they actually can't play Pyroclasm because it hits their own creatures. So yeah, Whip Flare's great, and he'll probably be using that. Grafdigger's Cage also has some utility against Malyrapod as it shuts off their Court of Callings and their Birthing Pods. That's primarily the way that Luis will find cards like Kataki, so I expect Grafdigger's Cage also to be used in the matchup.
As do I. And I think, you know, the options that Michael has here are pretty good, and the one thing that you want to make sure that you're doing with Affinity is, yeah, you've got a lot of sideboard options, but all of those cards that we're basically mentioning outside of the Etched Champion, they're not creatures. So you want to make sure that you still are threat dense, and that you only have a certain number of reactive cards, and if you do draw that Grafdigger's Cage, it's obviously going to have a huge impact on the game, but you still want to be able to beat down while playing the cage.
Right. So basically what we saw there, in game 1, Michael was able to not draw Luis, and Affinity does this a lot. It's one of the reasons you want to play Affinity. But if he boards in too many cards, or even for every card he boards in, that percentage of games where he nut draws goes down. Now, because there's high impact cards like Grafdigger's Cage, that's fine for the first couple cards. But you're right, the bar for each card for him to board in is pretty high. The card has to be really good, or he should probably be left in the board for the matchup.
Scott-Vargas takes a look at his opening hand. He looks happy. We're underway here in game number 2 of our quarterfinals. The Hall of Famer is going to lead off with an Overgrown Tomb into a Birds of Paradise, starting the game off at 18. We'll see if Sigrist has a crazy turn 1 like we saw in the last game.
Yeah, and I think it might even come back to get him if he does have a crazy turn 1. Luis, it looks like he has the one of Orzhov Pontiff out of the board in his opening hand. So if Sigrist has, you know, that Vault, Scourge, Memnite opening, he could get really punished.
You know, it's tough, too, because it's only a one-of, it's in the sideboard, and, you know, you expect the Orzhov Pontiff to be potted for, not something that they actually do draw, potentially corded for. So it's tough to just play around it on, you know, the second or third turn of the game. As you see, he's going to lead off here with a Blinkmoth Nexus. Looks like he's going to turn the Nexus into an artifact to facilitate Mox Opal. That's going to be a Vault Scourge, so I am incorrect. But he does have an Ornithopter as well, which means now Mox Opal is on.
Yeah, so he has the Mox Opal on, Vault Scourge is played there. He's made 4 permanents this turn. He looks like he has the remaining cards of Dismember, Island, Thoughtcast, and one more that we'll see here. Yeah, you can dismember the Birds of Paradise.
I was a little curious if you do that, but slowing this deck down is pretty nice. Also, you know, just kind of messing with their mana a little bit.
It slows Luis down. The danger there, he's running some risks. If Luis had, say, the natural turn to Kataki, he would be pretty much dead because he made that play.
Yeah. Well, looks like the risk may have paid off for Sigrist, who is at 14, but his life total doesn't really matter all that much. You see he does have a Thoughtcast, also has an Arcbound Ravager, a Springleaf Drum hanging out over there. He wants to be as aggressive as possible, just like we saw in game number 1. This draw's a little bit slower, obviously, but it can really still get somewhere as he's going to cast a Thoughtcast right now.
Yeah, the draw's fast and that it has a high velocity. He's playing a lot of cards, but that said, he hasn't really played a card that does anything yet. And he's played a bunch of 0-2s and 1-1s. Now, the beauty of Affinity is all it takes is one Arcbound Ravager to make those 0-2s and 1-1s into very real threats.
Well, you asked for it and you got it. So Arcbound Ravager is here, and we'll see exactly what he wants to do with that. But he's going to start by attacking for 1 with Vault Scourge, going to put Scott-Vargas down to 17, also going to bump himself up a little to 15. You'll see Scott-Vargas sacrifice the Misty Rainforest, going to search out a Temple Garden. And again, he's automatically underneath the gun, and Arcbound Ravager is going to play probably a pretty big role in this game.
Yeah, Arcbound Ravager is good because it demands 2 artifact removal spells. The first removal spell has to remove the Ravager, and then once Ravager, if you try to remove the Ravager, he'll throw all his counters onto a different creature, so then you have to have a removal spell for that creature. And oftentimes the creatures are large enough that you can't really afford to take that time.
So Scott-Vargas on his 3rd turn of the game. He's got access to 3 mana so far, potentially 4 when he does play a land, assuming he has one. But again, he's behind the 8 ball right away, and you mentioned Kataki right from the start. Now, Kataki gets a little more interesting right now because as good as a card as that is, as there's a Rage Averse Thicket, you know, I'm sure Sigrist has had to play around it a little bit over the course of this weekend, and there is a Birthing Pod. Now, Scott-Vargas could just play this, sacrifice it, and go get Kataki right now.
And I mean, that is the game plan. This card is so good against Affinity. You're right that Sigrist can play around it, but let's get Kataki up here. He took 4 to make this card because of how good it can be against Affinity. What it's going to mean is that Michael will get to keep 3 artifacts this turn, and next turn he'll get to keep 2. Oh, he can keep 4. Sorry, he can keep 4 this turn.
Yeah, he can get a little. I mean, he can get a little creative on what he keeps, what he doesn't keep. You know, because he has access to 4 mana. He's got the Mox Opal, the Nexus, the Island, and the Springleaf Drum. So he can pay for some number of artifacts. 4 would be the max, but also he gets to decide on exactly how many he wants to pay for and how he wants to juggle things, because now Ravager can start eating artifacts and then you don't have to pay for those. So a very skilled Affinity player, they don't care all that much about Kataki. Obviously, it's relevant and it's going to dictate how they play the game. But if you're skilled with Affinity, you've been in this situation before, and it's not that big of a deal.
Island can pay for their Arcbound Ravager every turn, and then if the Ravager dies to something else, then he can throw the counters onto the Nexus, and that, while it becomes an artifact when it's activated, is not an artifact on its own, so there's no upkeep he has to pay there.
So you see Sigrist is now moving around his resources. Now he says, okay, Kataki's on the stack a bunch of times here. All my artifacts are going to cost 1, so I'm going to start adding some mana. I'm going to pay for some things. He's already setting himself up to figure out what he wants to do on his upkeep here as far as payment effects.
Yeah, it looks like he paid for Vault Scourge and Arcbound Ravager. Nothing else, and then he sacrificed those 3 artifacts to the Ravager.
So now Ravager is a 4/4, and it looks like happy. He even gets to cast more spells this turn if he'd like. He drew a Darksteel Citadel, which can provide mana. Now that is an artifact, so Kataki will mess with that a little bit, but he's going to drop it down anyway, and he also has a Master of Ethereum in his hand. So now everybody's a little bit bigger, a little bit stronger, and oh, Master's a huge threat too.
Yeah, he's got a lot of huge threats still, and that's, you know, he only has to push across 12 more damage. He's going to lose more artifacts on his next upkeep, but Arcbound Ravager in particular is a card that's good at playing around Kataki.
And the other thing, too, don't forget that Birthing Pot over there, as good as a card as that is, that's an artifact, my friend. So if Scott-Vargas wants to keep that around, he's going to have to pay 1 for it. Now, of course, he could chump block with the old Kataki here on the Ravager, and then he wouldn't have to pay 1. But then, what did Kataki even really accomplish? Doesn't seem like that much.
Yeah, so far it's killed a Drum, an Ornithopter, and a Mox Opal. And by killed, I mean it turned them into 1/1 counters, which is something that Michael was maybe going to do anyway. Yeah. So it hasn't accomplished much yet. It's going to stop Michael from continually flooding the board, but yeah, Luis can't be that far behind when he plays Kataki. As you see, Michael can, you can still lose with a Kataki in play.
And it's interesting because with the mana base that Affinity has now in this format, due to the banning of the artifact lands, you see the Island out there, they've got 8 copies of Nexus and Blink Moth and Ink Moth. They've got Glimmer Voids everywhere as Kataki's going to jump in front of the Arcbound Ravager bus. Before with Kataki, you had to pay for all those artifact lands, you just lost everything. But they've got, not basics, but just lands that aren't artifact lands. And so as a result, Kataki isn't the backbreaker that it once was.
Yeah, I see Luis chumping it away. So now, what he really wants to find is artifact removal. Like I said, cards like Harmonic Sliver, like Kasali Pride Mage. But the difficult part here with it is that a lot of his weapons he has, like I said, he had that Orzhov Pontiff early on. That was never able to be a card. The creatures are far too big already.
Yeah. And he still has that Orzhov Pontiff in his hand. He's trying to figure out, okay, I've got 3 lands, I've got a Birthing Pod, I've got the best card in my deck on the table. Now, what can I do with it? As we're being updated here very quickly, Josh McClain, playing Birthing Pod, of course, against Oscar Jones. McClain was down a game, he evened it up. So they're going to be going to a 3rd and final one between the 2 and 7 seed. Jones will be on the play there, but we'll turn our attention back here with Michael and Luis in a world of trouble.
Yeah. And things are looking a little grim for our Hall of Famer right now, just because he's under so much pressure from each creature. Like, he could cast spells to deal with all these cards, and he does have spells to deal with all of them, but I'm not sure he can cast them fast enough. He's taking huge chunks of damage each turn, and he only has so many mana to work with. So even if he had the right cards, getting them onto the battlefield's another story.
Yeah, some of the appeal of Affinity, and we saw it in the first game, but we even see it in this one. Michael's draw this game wasn't as explosive as the first one, but this one has got more sustainability and more power. Master's huge, Arcbound Ravager is huge. Arcbound Ravager is a card that basically forces you to have 2 removal spells, one for itself and then one for what you modular onto. So while it wasn't as crazy fast as the last game, this one just feels more robust.
Yeah, and it shows, so Sigrist's hand at the beginning of the game was just a bunch of enablers. We saw him put 5 permanents on the battlefield. They were all 1/1s and 0/2s. And really it shows, like, once you lay that groundwork of these, these kind of silly artifacts, or like artifacts that look underwhelming, that allows the star cards in deck, your Ravagers, your Masters, your Platings, to just shine.
Pontiff going to come into play. You see Scott-Vargas is going to sacrifice that Misty Rainforest, get a forest.
Yeah, and remember, because of Master of Ethereum, it's not going to kill the Vault Scourge. It's shrinking everything. The Pontiff, when he pods it away, is going to haunt something. Haunt is a pretty confusing effect.
Tell me what you think about Haunt.
All right, so I don't think we would ever see an ability like this again because of how weird it is to play with. So when Orzhov Pontiff enters the battlefield, he does his ability. Well, that's easy. Now, instead of going to the graveyard, it's going to exile, and then it's going to haunt this Master of Ethereum. And if the Master of Ethereum dies, then we'll get the Orzhov Pontiff effect again.
Yeah, either the +1/+1 or the -1/-1. I don't think it's going to actually come up here. What's more important is that Scott-Vargas is sacrificing a 3 into a 4 with Birthing Pod. And if you're a Sigrist fan, he had to pay 2 light to do it. So let's see what 4 Scott-Vargas can find. The options, of course, you've got Ranger Vios, you've got Murderous Redcap, Linvala is an option, even though I don't know if that's still in his deck. Is there a 4-drop that's great in this situation?
Well, and I think that's some of the difficulty. I don't see one that's particularly good right now. He's going to go for Linvala, so Arcbound Ravager can't throw counters around at the very least. The danger is he took 4 damage to cast the Linvala, and I believe he's going to have to chump with the Linvala this turn, so he's not really making any progress.
So Sigrist will cut Scott-Vargas' deck, and he will untap. He'll take a draw. In the driver's seat here with a large Master of Ethereum, a 5/5 Arcbound Ravager, of course 4 counters, and then 1 from the Master's bonus, and a 2/2 Vault Scourge. And as you mentioned, Linvala will actually shut down Arcbound Ravager from being able to sacrifice itself to move the counters elsewhere, but I'm not convinced that Sigrist even needs to do that this game.
Yeah, I don't really understand what the advantage... Well, I guess he plays Linvala so that Sigrist can't kill him this turn by throwing counters on Vault Scourge, but that's all that accomplishes. It buys him... I'm not even positive it buys him a turn. Like, I think he's just dead.
Into the red zone we go, and an extension of the hand. Michael Sigrist defeats Luis Scott-Vargas 2-0. Affinity, your #1 seed, is moving on, defeating Maleriapod in 2 very, very fast games.
Affinity is a good deck to win games quickly with. Its good draws are very powerful. We saw